Believe it or not, somehow I still have not read The Secret History, so that's what we're gonna do. I am a lover of mysteries and thrillers, and it feels kind of crazy that I somehow never ended up picking up The Secret History before now. So we're gonna rectify that today. This book was first published in 1992, so it is an older title, and I feel like everyone and their mother has read it at this point. But somehow I don't have any spoilers for it. I barely even know what it's about, and I've heard mostly good reviews, so I feel like it's time to check it out. It does have over 736,000 ratings on Goodreads with an average rating of a 4.17, so that does seem pretty promising. That's a pretty good average rating and a huge amount of popularity. And I feel like when people talk about dark academia, they usually talk about The Secret History, and dark academia got really popular, especially in the last couple of years. I'm not really necessarily drawn to dark academia stuff. I've read a good handful of them. I've enjoyed some, I haven't enjoyed others. So I'm just interested to get a fresh take on this book, see what my experience is reading it for the first time, and bring you along with me. Okay, I am 104 pages in. That is the first 2 chapters of this book. These chapters are so long, but it is time to do a little first impressions since I got through the first little chunk of the book and have an idea of what's going on. What I was kind of expecting with this, what I thought it was about, is that someone dies in this friend group in college and maybe they murdered him, and that's the mystery that's going to be unraveled throughout the story, which I guess is kind of what's going on. You learn in the very beginning that one of the people dies. Let me lay out the characters for you. As I usually do with these dedicated book vlogs, I'm going to make this be a choose your own adventure. Like, you can watch this with no spoilers, or you can watch this with spoilers. Spoilers will be clearly labeled. You can skip over them if you want. But we're only 100 pages in, which, you know, sounds like a lot, but nothing's a spoiler yet. This is just the setup and who the characters are. So nothing in this section is going to be spoilery, but just in case you wanted to know for the rest of the video. So let me go ahead and lay out the characters of the story for anyone who's following along, just to set up where we're at so far. So our main character is this guy named Richard. There's a lot of details about these characters that is given throughout this book. It's just very dense. You learn a lot about these people. I'm just going to tell you what you need to know as we're following along. Richard is this guy from California, and he decides he wants to go off to this college in Vermont because he thought the brochure looked nice, basically, is the long and short of it. And so he ends up at this college, and he goes and he plans to study something in particular, but he's also had like some experience learning the Greek language, and he has to have some language courses, so he decides he wants to enroll in the Greek classes. But then he learns about this professor named Julian, who is this kind of like enigmatic character at this university. Julian teaches the Greek courses, but he's very particular, and his advisor's like, you probably shouldn't even try to get into his class, but that is a challenge that Richard wants to take on. So he ends up getting pulled into this environment where he's taking these classes with Julian. What that means is that he has to drop all his other classes. He's going to take all his classes from Julian because that's the particular way he likes to do things. He'll be learning Greek, but also be learning things like philosophy and, you know, whatever else. And Julian only admits a very select group of people in his courses, so there's like 6 of them now with Richard joining the fold. The other characters you're following are the other students who are a student of Julian. You have Henry, who is really rich and kind of grumpy. He also is really into language and translation, and he seems like he's really smart, but he has a very pretentious air about him, as many of these people do. He doesn't believe in the aesthetics of standardized testing, for example, so he didn't ever take his SAT. Like, he's just a little bit annoying. Then you have Bunny, and Bunny is the one that you know in the very beginning is the one who ends up dead. He is kind of larger than life, very loud, very boisterous, and he likes to take advantage of people. There's a guy named Francis, and honestly, you don't really know a lot about Francis yet, except for he's the kind of gangly looking one, I think. And then there are these twins, Charles and Camilla, and also I don't feel like you know a lot about Charles and Camilla yet. Camilla just stands out because she's the only woman in the group. So that's the group of students, and as Richard is joining them, he is very much an outsider to their group. They clearly have a lot of connections and history together, and he's kind of trying to make his way in, and you're following this first little bit of their time together as he's spending some time with them, getting to know them, trying to make his way in, but realizing there's still some things they're doing that they aren't inviting him on, and he's starting to observe these weird behaviors that they do and the weird ways that they interact with Julie. Julian, and he's trying to piece it all together. But like I said, the story begins and you know that Bunny has died. So the story is also being told to you from Richard after all this has happened, and it's in the voice of like, oh, when I reflect on these things, and like these things are kind of fuzzy. So it's like you're hearing from him how he remembers all of this going down. How I'm feeling so far, it's going okay. I'm intrigued. It is very densely written and I'm just like struggling a little bit with that. There's a part of me that wants to just really enjoy this book and really just like let all the sophisticated language take me in. But most of me just feels that pretentiousness and isn't like super drawn to that as my favorite thing. So it's going fine so far. I've been a little bit confused at times, but I'm just letting that take me on the journey as I'm trying to clear things up and figure out who people are and what's happening and where the direction of the story is going. And it seems like it's going to be about whatever weird things and beliefs this Julian guy has that he is embedding in this group and how that's affecting them and all their different beliefs about life and how that's going to be taken too far and then lead to Bunny being dead. It's also been funny the things this reminds me of, like clearly this came first before these other things, but I can see so much inspiration that was taken from this into those other things. Like for one, the most obvious one maybe is Bunny by Mona Awad. That is a dark academia story. It follows a very similar kind of setup where there's this group of these people, there's an outsider trying to get in, they're doing some weird things that she's going to discover along the way, and they call each other Bunny. So that just feels so tightly tied to this book being an inspiration for that, which is interesting to see like now going back years later. I read Bunny years ago and now seeing like, oh, I can see how a lot of this would have inspired what Mona Awad chose to do with that story. And more recently, the movie Saltburn. I feel like I'm seeing Saltburn on the page with the college parties and the people and their pretentiousness, but the energy about them and these like big sweeping estates and just like hanging out in the sun and the things that they're doing with their time. So it's really funny to now look back and be like, oh, if I would have read this years ago, I would have seen this in so many things that I've read and watched since this has come out. So early impressions, I'm not like obsessed and in love with this. I didn't know if I would be. It just seems like something people are really passionate about. I don't know if I'm going to become more interested in it as it goes on. It might just be I'm not clicking with the pretentiousness that is on purpose, and that is a staple of the dark academia kind of style in general, but I'm intrigued enough. I'm curious to see where it goes. I'm getting more into the writing style as I keep moving through it, and I will let you know my further opinions as I get further in the text.
I don't see an end to it. I don't know what would happen if my parents got disgusted and cut me off, which is extremely likely to happen at some point in the near future if things go on as they are.
Progress. We're making progress. I'm 172 pages in. That's the start of chapter 5. These are the longest chapters I've ever experienced in my life. It's time for another update. Non-spoilery first, I'm having such a roller coaster experience with this book. I will have moments where I feel like I'm getting in the groove with it, where I'm really intrigued. I feel like the plot's moving, things are getting interesting. But then there's these long stretches sometimes that feel so boring to me and they're so wordy and I'm just like, God, I can't wait to get to the next thing. So that's not the most fun experience, to be very like on and off. Having fun, not having fun, having fun, not having fun. For me, I think it's the pieces that become really long, like inner monologue, exposition, diary writing type of writing where Richard is reflecting on a long period of something happening and he just takes the longest time to explain it that anyone has ever explained anything. Those parts drag on for me. I really like when we get the characters together, when there's dialogue, when there's things being said, when the plot is moving forward. Those pieces I find very interesting. All the other pieces, not so interesting. So it's a little rough going. I am going to try out the audiobook for the first time today. I haven't tried it out yet, but I'm moving so slowly through this book. I'm like, I'm gonna have to like incorporate some audiobook time in my day to get through this as well. And so I'm curious to see how that maybe affects my experience with those longer parts. Like maybe that helps it feel more flowy in my brain hearing it versus like staring at these really long, chunky paragraphs full of small, tiny text on the page. To go into some quick little spoilers of what's happened in the first 4 chapters of the book and how I'm feeling about it, it is getting more interesting in a spoilery sense of what's happening. So last we spoke, I told you about all the characters and how Richard was trying to get in with them and become friends with them and kind of a little bit of a glimpse of what each of them was like. I do feel like I have a better grasp of Henry and of Bunny at this point. They feel more like characters to me. I've learned more about them. Bunny is just a very interesting character, very obnoxious, acts like he has all this money, doesn't really have any money, and he's very proud. I would say that is a good word to describe him. Henry is a pretty complex character so far. He's got more to him than it looks like, and that's something Bunny says to Richard as well. He's like, you think you got Henry figured out, but you haven't. And I think that makes a character really interesting. So I really like getting to understand more about Henry. What happened in this segment of the book is that we come upon the winter holidays, and so everyone kind of has their own plans. Henry and Bunny are planning to go to Rome. Camilla and Charles are going to stay with their uncle and work with him or something. Frances is going somewhere else. And so Richard is left all alone, and he doesn't have anywhere to live, and he doesn't have money. So he ends up bumming off of a hippie in the area. That was kind of weird and random, but he lives with some hippie, and he lives in this like terrible house with no heating, and there's a hole in the roof, and he almost freezes to death in this section. And it's just a really long portion of him being really cold in the winter, being alone in this guy's house, walking back and forth to go work for another professor over this time period. And that is just the thing that drags on. I was like, oh my God, come on, get me out of this. But then Henry ends up surprisingly returning early from Rome without Bunny. He comes a little earlier, and Henry kind of rescues him and takes him into his apartment and helps heal him. He actually takes him to the hospital first because it turns out Richard got pneumonia. He ended up really sick from being so cold, and so Henry kind of nurses him back to health. And in this time he's spending with Henry, he's curious like why Henry came back from Rome earlier, what happened with Bunny, what's going on there. And there's this sense of eeriness, like something weird is going on. And then finally the group does get back from winter break, and then Henry, Camilla, Charles, and Frances are all kind of MIA a little bit, like they don't really know where they are. And that's when Bunny is kind of talking to Richard more, and that's when he's kind of like, you know, Henry's a little more complex than you think, but Bunny's also just not like saying anything out front. He won't like say what happened and why Henry left Rome earlier. And Richard even starts thinking like, did Henry make a pass at Bunny, and Bunny's such a homophobe and that freaked him out, and all these things. And like I was kind of thinking that too as the reader, but no, it turns out what happened is that the group of them, they have been interested, and this is what the weirdness has been all along. They have been trying to like have a divine experience basically. Henry describes it as having a bacchanal, which is like a Greek Rome kind of thing, where you get really drunk and engage in wild revelry and try to communicate with the divine. And so that's why they've been like boiling leaves and trying to like get drunk enough to get to that space, get high enough to get to that space. So they've been doing weird shit for a long time trying to have this kind of experience. And it turns out that they did that, and then they ended up killing a man. So they were going to flee to Argentina. They were getting one-way tickets to go to Argentina, but then they decided not to because like Camilla and Charles couldn't find their passport and whatever. I guess they've kind of gotten away with the murder at this point, and now Bunny is like being annoying about it, rightfully so, question mark. And so what I think it's leading to is that Bunny doesn't like, I don't know if Bunny was like a part of the killing someone. I think he was a part of like all the partying and things, but Bunny isn't gonna let it go, obviously. And so I think that's what's gonna lead into, you know, we know Bunny ends up dead. Sounds like they're gonna want to kill Bunny because he won't shut up about the fact that they killed someone. So that's getting more interesting, it's getting more dark, and it's getting darker faster than I expected it to at this part of the book. So now I'm like, well, where's the rest of the story gonna go? Like, we know Bunny dies, now we kind of understand a motive. What are we gonna do with the rest of these hundreds of pages? But at least the story's picking up and I'm getting more intrigued. Made it to book 2. I'm 275 pages in. This is chapter 6, and I don't really have that much more to say. This is such a slow burn. I made it to chapter 7 last night. I'm 67% of the way through the book. It's taking forever. I am liking it less and less as I go along. Also, the audiobook experience, horrible. Absolutely horrible time. Not that the audiobook is horrible. I mean, it kind of is. There's like this staticky sound in the background the whole time. So if you're someone who uses like earphones and you can hear the audio really closely while you're listening to the audiobook, it might drive you nuts. But also, the book and the audiobook isn't sectioned out the same way that the chapters are in here. So if you like switch back and forth between physical and audio, it's gonna be hard to keep up with where you are if you sit the book down, listen on audio for an hour, and then try to figure out where you are in the book, because the chapters and the parts in the book, they don't align. At least not the audiobook I'm listening to on Libby, and the cover looks exactly the same as this, so I feel like I don't know how many variations could be out there. It's so boring, nothing is happening, and it just is using so many words to barely move the plot. I am determined to finish it today. I will do whatever it takes to be done with this. I did it. I finished. I don't have the emotional or mental capacity to talk about it right now. I'll check in with you when I do. I took some time to sit on this book, to be done with it, to process, and I just didn't want to talk about it as soon as I finished it because I was just pushing so hard to get to the end. I was like, I need to just be away from it for a minute. So it's been a couple hours, and now we can talk about my final experience with The Secret History. In general, I don't get it. I don't get why this book is so beloved. Really not a lot happens. It's really drawn out, it's really wordy, and frankly, it's kind of just boring. I will be giving this a 2-star for my final rating. I just did not really enjoy it. It was okay. The story was okay. There just wasn't a lot here for me to like. It's really not much of a mystery because the story begins and you know that Bunny was murdered by this group of friends. And then the whole story is just going back in time leading up to the events and then some of the events after Bunny's death. The story also begins, you know, from Richard's perspective, and he's reflecting on his fatal flaw being relating to aesthetics. I can't remember exactly how he phrased it, but something about like he gets so caught up in the look of things that he's not always seeing them for what they really are, which is kind of the message of the book as he's reflecting on his experience. That's his life lesson that he's learned through this. And then he's reflecting on this experience he had with this group of friends that he made that he spent very little time with in the grand scheme of things, and then what happened to them over the course of a couple months. When I read things like this, I do always get really interested in what people like about them so much when I don't like it. So I will be diving into more reviews, listening to people's videos. I want to hear people's thoughts on this. I want to know what they like so much about it. If you are a lover of this book, you can comment down below and let me know what you love about it as well. I am curious to see that side of things, but personally for me, I just didn't really get it. I had such high hopes for this. I've been building it up in my mind for a long time. It was one of the backlist books I really wanted to get to this year. I just had an idea of this book. When I looked at it, when I thought of it, I just had this expectation in my mind, and it was just so underwhelming to me because of everything I thought that it might be, which is unfortunate. For some final spoilers on what goes on in this book, spoiler banner on the screen, skip this part if you do not want to know. The TLDR of this book can be summarized so very quickly. There's a group of friends. Bunny dies. It's because they killed him. Why did they do that? It's because they were trying to have these bacchanals. They were trying to reach these moments of the divine, getting drunk, partying, and they accidentally ended up killing a guy. This was before Bunny died. They killed a guy. We talked about this already. And none of them were really bothered by the fact that they killed that guy, except Bunny was upset about it. Bunny wasn't there when they killed the guy. Bunny was back at Henry's place, and then they all got back and they're all bloody, and then he ends up piecing together what happened because he sees a newspaper article about a guy who died. He's like, oh my god, you guys killed that guy. And so Bunny starts taking advantage of them and is like taking all of their money and like making them feel uncomfortable so that they have to like pay for all these fancy dinners and things for him to keep him appeased so he won't go blabbing on about the fact that they killed someone. And then eventually they're like, well, I guess we've just got to kill Bunny. And so they take Bunny out to the cliff. They do all this orchestrating, all this planning. They take him out there with Richard and they kill Bunny. After that, the rest of the book is just them suffering the consequences of that. They're all kind of deteriorating in different ways. Charles starts drinking a lot. He's drunk all the time. Francis starts having panic attacks. He thinks he's having a heart attack and dying, but he's having panic attacks. And then I think by the end of the book, he tries to kill himself at one point. It's either him or Charles. One of them tries to kill himself. Camilla's all messed up about it. Henry's getting really weird and just doing a bunch of weird things. And that just drags on and 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 on. They go to his funeral. Things feel weird now that they're around his family. And then they get in this whole situation. Julian finds out what happened, that they killed the person, and then presumes that they killed Bunny. And then he just kind of disappears. Julian does not become as big of a character in the story as I thought he would. And then there's this situation and they're all like in a fuss, in a fight, in a fury. Henry has a gun. Henry ends up killing himself. And then that's kind of it. The group dissolves. They all go on about their own lives, and Richard realizes this thing that he's like, oh, I get so caught up in the aesthetics of things that I never see them for what they really are. He learns things about them along the way, like Camilla and Charles were totally sleeping together even though they're twin brother and sister, and Henry was definitely taking advantage of him and manipulated him to even have Richard find out that they killed that guy so that they could kind of use him as a scapegoat. So he comes to all of these reflections of like, oh, these people, like, we're doing all these horrible things and I wasn't paying attention to any of it because I just thought they were cool and I wanted to be one of their friends. That's it. That's the book summarized. I found it so boring, so underwhelming. There really wasn't any suspense or tension for me in seeing the unraveling of this, and it just felt so wordy and it felt so long to get through some of these scenes. And once they're all deteriorating and they're feeling anxious and all these things are happening, I'm like, yeah, of course, this is playing out because, you know, you keep killing people, so of course it's gonna affect you in some way. It did surprise me when Henry killed himself. Like, I wasn't expecting that, but I don't know, that didn't feel like a big plot surprise. We kind of just then move on from it and then, you know, move on into the epilogue and they drift away and that's it. I don't have much more to say about it, honestly, in the spoiler section because it's really fast to sum up and I don't have many specific thoughts or feelings or things to nitpick. I just found it kind of boring. So that is it for my final thoughts on The Secret History. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read this book before, whether you loved it or hated it. Let me know what you think about it. Let me know if I've made you curious to pick it up on your own, or if you've decided that maybe it's not so worth your time and you're just gonna listen to the spoilers and not end up picking it up. I will also note that as I've begun to look more into this book, I'm looking for like reviews, starting to dive in. I want to hear other people's thoughts about it. I have seen a series of things about Donna Tartt, the author of this, and problematic behavior, especially in her book The Goldfinch, and that being like ridiculously racist and offensive and harmful and painful to people. So this is definitely not an author I'm going to care to pick up any other books from in the future, especially because I found this book so boring and because I'm hearing such awful things about The Goldfinch. So maybe just a word of caution if you're watching this video and you're starting to poke around, you're interested, and you're thinking about picking up the author. Sounds like she's not a great person to support anyways. So disclaimer here on the end as I'm learning these things in the video. I didn't even think this book was that great anyways. So save your time, save your money, save your support for better books and better people. And on that note, I will be saying goodbye. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.